Okay, welcome everyone. This will be the last webinar of the year through Even Spray. Thank you all for joining us today. Today we have Dr. Leah Brilman. She's a project manager of technical services for DLF Pickseed and Seed Research of Oregon. She received a bachelor degree in biology from California State University, Bakersfield, and master and PhD degree in agronomy and plant genetics from the University of Arizona. She's a turfgrass breeder who focuses on breeding turfgrass cultivars with reduced inputs. She received the 2018 Distinguished Service Award from the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America, is a fellow of the Crop Science Society, has received the 2007 NACPB Breeder of the Year, 2011 recipient of the William Daniels Award for Educator of the Year, and 2012 recipient of the Fred Grau Award in Turfgrass Science from Crop Science Society. She's also developed and administered undergraduate contests for turf students for both the GCSAA and STMA. Again, as usual, there will be CEC points available for this webinar. Please, if you haven't done so, change your name to just a first and last name so we know who you are. The quiz will be sent out after the webinar is done. And one other order of business, Even Spray will be hosting with EcoT an in-person event at Rossmere on March 31st, and information around that will be sent out this week. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Leah.
Well, good afternoon, I guess, for all of you. It's still morning for me. And we're going to talk about successful establishment, optimizing short seed supplies for superior genetics. And okay, we're going to talk, a lot of it's going to deal with bent grasses and some of that, but I'll also talk some about things like Kentucky bluegrasses and other species you may be using where you are. So successful establishment. So actually, when we look at spring and summer, the best time to establish bent grass, and actually most species, is in summer and early fall. You get faster germination and establishment with those warmer soil temperatures. You get less competition with existing poa annua. You get less poa annua germination. And if you seed at this time, you can actually affect change in advance. So we're hearing reports of winter damage in parts of Canada and the US, the northeastern US, some of the Midwest areas. But if you actually started this last summer, there's less possibility that you would have damage right now. The second best time to establish bent grass is actually late fall or winter, which is what we call dormant seeding. And there the seed germinates in the spring before you can often get out on the stand. And the winter conditions actually prime the seed for early germination. So dormant seeding, you often get quicker, faster germination than you do if you wait and do a spring seeding. The reality is often spring seeding is required to repair damage. But the more often you seed in summer and winter, the less often it should be required to do spring seeding, because you can actually affect change and get other species in. So why interseed all species? The aim is to improve the stand of turfgrass by introducing different species or cultivars. Say total renovation is not possible due to the expense, usage, etc. There's a lot of reasons. We've seen changes in weather patterns, so older species and cultivars do not perform as well. And in a lot of the Canada and the US, we're seeing dollar spot weather longer into the growing season. We're seeing wider swings in winter weather, less consistent snowfall in many areas. I understand you guys, most of you still have quite a bit of snowfall or snow on the ground. But Poa annua, less than 24 hours above freezing, can break its dormancy in the spring. And then if you get another wave of cold temperatures, it can kill very readily. Snow insulates and protects from damage. So the absence of snow increases the probability that you will get Poa annua damage. And we're also seeing increased summer heat and drought. Drought length may increase summer death, non-irrigated or where you have rationed water. Heat increases the ET rates, making the drought worse. And old type cultivars or genetics may not have the heat tolerance that are needed, even in some of the more northern areas. I know some of eastern British Columbia was extremely hot last summer compared to what traditionally they've been. So principles of interseeding all species, your aim is to improve that stand of turfgrass by introducing a different species of cultivar. If you can, you need to correct problems of shades, roots, drainage, soil compaction, and you need to weaken the stand of your undesirable grass by mowing as low as you can. If possible, create holes to reduce competition between your existing turf and seedlings. Seed at a higher rate, fertilize top dress, or drag in the seed and try and keep it moist to a certain degree. Cultivars vary in speed of establishment, and you can use that as one selection criteria when you select the cultivar to put in. And if you can, seed at the time of year that favors the fast germination and growth of that desired species. So why interseed? Repair damage winter, summer, change species of grass. Maybe you want to do a lower height of cut is desired than what your previous species could tolerate, or you want to reduce inputs, which would make your turf grass more sustainable. You want to change the cultivar of existing species to improve conditions. New cultivars in almost all of our species, we have improvements in disease resistance, in stress tolerance, and less water requirements. And it helps prevent Poa annua invasion. If you have seed of that desired species in the stand, it increases the chance of it coming up instead of Poa annua. So if you never put seed in your stand, every time you get a divot, every time you get a ball mark, the only seed that's there that can come up is Poa annua or other weeds. Well, if you have your desired species in there, the seed of it, at least you have a fighting chance of getting something other than Poa in that particular hole. So seed at best time for germination and growth of desired species. Reduce the competition between existing grass and your new species. So scalp or lower height of cut to reduce competition. Holes from divots where in winter or summer damage, you often get better establishment. Holes created by aerification or spiking. And often those tend to be a little more successful than slit seeding. Slit seeding can work, but we sometimes find these holes make a little bigger area that allow the new young seedlings to come up in. Many people I know use more than one seeding technique. They may aerify and then do a slit seeder. They may do multiple things at the same time when they do it. Always have seed of desired species and stand for when holes do occur. Otherwise, weeds will establish. We recommend to seed at minimum of 2 times the seeding rate of a new stand to actually achieve a change in species or cultivar, but any seeding rate helps. And we actually have some people who do just very low amounts of seed very many times during the year, so they have some seed in that stand at all points in time. Seed to soil contact is needed, but can be achieved by traffic, dragging in, or placement. And always more successful in weakest areas of stand where you need more coverage. So let's just talk a little bit about grass germination or germination in general. Needed for germination of seeds, you need a viable non-dormant seed. You need water, you need oxygen, you need temperature. Acidity, salt level, light, these can influence your germination level and how much comes up. But for all aspects, there's both minimum and maximum thresholds. One of the things we deal with is grass seed is very small. So it very rapidly imbibes water or takes water in, but it can also dry very rapidly because it's such a small grass seed. So this is what happens. There's a phase 1 in germination where the water is taken up. And then phase 2 is where all this metabolic activation is going on. There's variable duration of this dependent upon temperature and water potential. And then phase 2, that's actually when radical emergence occurs. It's your root may come out, or the top, your radical point of no return. And so you get germination and seedling growth. And it's most critical and vulnerable in this part of the plant life cycle, because if it dries down here, it will just die. So aspects of evaluation of germination. Final germination percentage, it depends upon the physiological age of the seed. Speed of germination is seed related. There are dormancy factors, and almost all of our turf grasses have some level of dormancy right after they are harvested. Some more than others. Kentucky bluegrasses have quite a bit. They really need to go through more of a winter time frame. So if we just harvested last fall, the same lot will have more dormancy, and those little germ numbers we give you on the tags, they actually do things at the seed lab to break that dormancy. So they see the optimal germ, but you may not see that because it's still got some of that dormancy locked in, which may slow germination if it's a brand new lot of seed. There's vigor and energy of the seed. The genetics, species and varieties can depend upon this, vary the speed of germination. So amount of reserves in the seed, which often is related to how big that seed is, and the speed of reserve mobilization. And then the speed of germination can be related to germination conditions, which the two most important ones are temperature, which has heat units, and moisture. And it's important if water availability is variable. Grasses are small, they're sown shallowly, and you have the risk of drying out before the roots can actually start growing deeper to stay in moist surroundings. So successful interseeding. Species differ in optimal germination temperature and establishment rate. So this is kind of, these here can germinate at the lowest temperature or germinate the faster at lower temperatures. These need higher temperatures for germination, or they germinate more slowly at low temperatures. So annual ryegrass, intermediate ryegrass, tetraploid perennial are probably your fastest ones. Red fescues, which include your chewing, slender creeper, are the same as velvet bent and poa triv. Then we get the diploid perennial ryegrasses, which are the same as the creeping bent. They germinate faster than colonial bent, which germinates faster than bluegrass, which is about the same as hard and sheep's fescue. And actually, turf type tall fescues need one of the higher temperatures for germination. But then we get one other thing that comes in here, which is establishment rate. And some species require actually higher nitrogen to establish well and rapidly. In particular, Kentucky bluegrass, hard and sheep fescue need a little more nitrogen at establishment. But these three species or subspecies, they actually establish the quickest and they come up at the lowest temperature. But then diploid perennial ryegrass is the next most rapid. Turf type tall fescue, once it's germinated, it establishes very rapidly. Red fescues and creeping bent grasses, poa triv, then velvet and colonial bent grass equal to Kentucky blue and hard and sheep's fescue. So this is just shows you some work that was done. This is based upon some work by Lawson in 2004. This shows you the lowest. This is your temperature C. This is your temperature F. Since I do this in both, Canada and Europe and New Zealand and in the US, I kind of have modified this slightly for all sorts of people. So actually, if you look, perennial ryegrass requires a little higher. That's the lowest temperature it will germinate. Red fescues and Kentucky bluegrass will actually germinate at a little lower soil temperature. But if you come over here at 5 degrees C, it only takes 8.8 days for half of the ryegrass to germinate, where it's going to take 23 days at that temperature for half of the Kentucky bluegrass to germinate. But as your temperatures go up, and most of the times when we talk about the temperature for germination, it's actually your air temperature, because we plant these so shallowly. It's not that 2-inch depth that people talk about. It's very much right at the top of the soil, which tends to be closer to what your air temperature is. You get a little moderation from having some soil contact, but it's definitely not like a 2-inch depth soil temperature. But if you can see all the way up here to 25 degrees C, there's only a couple days difference between ryegrass and Kentucky bluegrass. Even at 20 degrees C, where there's this, 15-day delay here at 5 degrees C. So the minimum germination temperature is similar for the species. The time to 50% germ is highly dependent upon temperature. At 5 degrees C, Kentucky bluegrass takes 14.4 days later than ryegrass, but at 25 degrees C, the difference is only 2.8 days. Difference in time of emergence will be even bigger, as the growth rate of perennial ryegrass seedlings is faster than Kentucky bluegrass. So difference in time of establishment will also depend on root growth and tillering of the grass seed plant. So in all establishment, besides emergence and germination, establishment also involves shoot growth, root growth, and tillering. And if you mow as soon as you can after grass seeds germinate, it actually makes them establish faster because it encourages tillering. Cutting off the top of those leaves actually sends hormonal messages to that grass plant, and they will actually tiller more rapidly. Causes of plant death after emergence that interact, we have drought, pests and diseases, competition for light, water, and nutrients, especially with an existing stand of grass, and our seed endosperm. So the food that's in that seed, they're depleted within 10 days after the start of a seed actually imbibing. This is similar for all species, as big seeded species normally grow much faster compared to small seeded ones. So fast germination means better chances to survive and less chances for weeds to establish. So soil influences on germination temperature, or how they can reduce germination. Low temperatures during winter and springtime in temperate zones, they can be aggravated by high soil moisture content, which slows up the heating of your soil in the spring. And so very often when I go out on golf courses, the places where we've lost a stand of grass is maybe where we have a low area and ice developed, and we've lost the stand of grass there. Well, often that's a very wet area. It's not draining well, and so it's not heating up as rapidly. So it's harder to get the new grass established in that area too. Then high temperatures during summertime in Mediterranean zones, if they have dry, dark soils, can actually transform sunshine into higher soil temperatures. I'll talk a little bit about priming or pre-germination, which can lower your minimum germination percent, but increases maximum germination percentage, increases salt tolerance, and in more than anything, it increases speed of germination. And when you're doing repairs, priming or pre-germination can sometimes help you get those repairs done. So this is just a quick formula for priming or pre-germination. Place up to 50 to 100 pounds of seed in a 55-gallon drum. If you're doing bent grass, we suggest just use a bucket, because otherwise you're going to lose it all. You fill the drum or the bucket with sufficient water to completely cover the seeds, and you stir it up. Make sure all the seeds are exposed to water and oxygen, and you leave it uncovered at room temperature, 60 to 70 degrees F. If you can, replace the water daily or in each 24-hour period. This removes some seed germination inhibitors that may have come out from the seed coat. Use room temperature water for best results, and don't forget to stir the seeds at least once a day. So try to replace that water. You don't have to replace it all. Just get some of it out, pour some of it out, and put some fresh in. And you repeat steps 3 to 4 for at least 2 days, up to 4 days. Species which have slower germination require more time than species like perennial ryegrass, which have rapid germination. Then you need to put the seed on a firm surface, which will allow excess water to dissipate, concrete slab, piece of plastic, something like that. And the seed can dry slightly, but not completely, so you can facilitate spreading. If you're not ready to seed it immediately, you can mist that seed to keep it moist. You can also dry it down as long as the root hasn't started coming out. You can dry it down in that condition, and that's actually what we would call a prime seed instead of pre-germinated seed. Or you can mix it with some kitty litter to help dry it down. Plant the seed immediately if you can. Mulch is appropriate. You will need to keep the seed moist, but not as many days, because it's ready to pop as soon as you put it down. So if you're going to do bent grass conversion, if you have poa annua or if you have older bent, the best results are if you can do multiple seedings during the summer, multiple years of interseeding for best results. Increased interseedings show results in 1 to 2 years. Fewer interseedings, results show in 3 to 5 years. Minimum of 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet or 10 grams per square meter per year. Seeding in late spring through late summer is more competitive with warm soil temperatures, but do not seed when night low temperatures remain above 82 degrees F, that probably, or 27 C, probably not a problem in your area, unless you have to. If you have to, go ahead and do it. Just make sure you've got water there. Again, dormant seeding is useful in many locations, and build that seed bank with dormant bent grass, so you have seed to sprout and repair later damage. In Japan, interseeding is considered a part of maintenance, and they're like Canada and parts of Europe. They have a much fewer numbers of fungicides and other chemistry to help them manage it. So they actually consider interseeding as part of their regular maintenance on it, and they want to have the newest cultivars in there all the time in it. So they actually spike and seed starting in early summer. They do down 10 to 15 grams per square meter total over the summer, 2 to 3 pounds per 1,000. They apply the seed to the surface. They top dress and use a drag mat to settle the seed into the openings. They actually repeat it every 7 to 10 days during the summer months, up to 6 to 8 times for the fastest resurfacing. They have actually a small amount of total seed applied. Example, they may go out 2 grams per square meter, 6 applications, and they 700 square meter green, they do 8.4 kgs per summer. And it's just part of what they do. We sell a lot of bent grass into Japan. If they start to run out of it, instead of waiting for ships, we will actually put bent grass onto airplanes to get over there if they've had issues. So poa annua and creeping bent grass competition. So creeping bent grass has been fighting back. The improvements in our newest creeping bent grass cultivars, and remember, not all cultivars have all these improvements. We've had significant improvements in dollar spot resistance. We have much greater microdochium and anthracnose resistance, which can be critical in areas such as you are. For poa annua really gets these things, yet creeping bent grass is much better than it. Higher density than older bent grasses, more tillers, more rapid tillering, but we've been selecting against any false crowning, so we don't get that scalping that you would get sometimes with older cultivars. Improved growth with low nitrogen, improved cool temperature growth, better spring and fall growth, better heat tolerance, better root growth, higher quality with less superintendent worry, less winter kill, less summer problems. If you just need to repair small areas, this Parade Accuform AccuSeed seeder, you can fill it with bent grass seed. You can set the depth, it's got a variable depth seeder, and it's great for small area repairs. If you have small snow mold patches, small areas of poa annua death, you can a targeted use of seed. And this is at the Olympic Club, the photo, Troy Flanagan sent it to me. He had used PoaCure on this green, and he had killed the POA. So he just came back because there is a residual with POA cure of like 6 weeks that can influence the germination of your bentgrass. But he found if he just came in here and used this cedar right over where the POA annua had gone away, he could get that bentgrass up right away. There didn't seem to be the problems with using the POA cure. So overseeding into POA annua can work. This is McKinsey into POA annua greens. This was Pine Top Country Club in Arizona, high elevation. This was 100% POA annua green, and this was after 2 years of interseeding. And this is actually Pender Harbor Golf Club, Sunshine Coast, British Columbia, north of Vancouver. Again, 100% POA annua to mostly bentgrass in 5 years, with just like being on a regular program of putting more seed into bentgrass seed into the system. So what are our causes of winter damage? Ice suffocation or ice sheets, low spots, collar dams. Fix problems before turf repair if possible. And then we can see anoxia and cellular damage. I know some of you guys are using covers. There's been a lot of good work, out of Olds College, looking at anoxia. We've also had some work at Michigan State Seed, or not State Seed, State University, and University of Massachusetts, looking at some of this ice sheet damage. And there is a whole research program looking at some of these winter loss things, both in the Canada and in the US. We get direct low temperature kill, crown hydration, winter desiccation. That seems to be what's going on in the upper areas of the central United States right now. Grass species with reduced low temperature tolerance, fungal pathogens, primarily snow molds, and then contributing factors. And you know these: shade, excessive fall fertilization, low height of cut in that fall hardening off period. So is it dead? If its feet were not nailed to the perch, would it be pushing up daisies? So under ice sheets, break up that ice sheet when and how. There are some good instructions out there. What species is under that ice sheet? And then there's the infamous smell test. If you can smell those sulfur compounds, low oxygen, did you have COVID? Can you still smell whether it's dying because of anoxia? We wonder about that sometimes. So if you can, if you suspect your green or what an area of your course is dead, pull cores as soon as you can, place in a warm, sunny location and look for regrowth. Realize that it could still die. And this is one thing I tell people, even if it initially shows regrowth, because maybe you get another cold snap come through. So the most critical time for many species is actually in the spring. It's not in the middle of the winter. They're pretty dormant then. And POA annua will break dormancy before creeping bentgrass, and warm temperatures for 1 day followed by cold can kill that annual bluegrass. So the cold tolerance of grass species for greens and cultivars can vary in each of these species. But one of the most superior is chewings fescues. Supply is currently very low. And I will tell you right now, and we can talk about it later, there is not a species of grass right now that I will not tell you that we're not having problems with supply. And if you wonder why prices are so high, there's many reasons, but I've spent half the morning looking for some lots of seed that we could use for certain uses. So supply is currently very low. Creeping bentgrass has excellent cold tolerance, followed by colonial bentgrass, which is called brown top in Europe. Limited cultivars and supply of that species. Slender creeping red fescue, again, more limited cultivars. And again, supply is very limited, just like chewings is. Good Poa trivialis or rough bluegrass, limited seed supply. It's primarily used in overseeding in South and in some areas for nurse crop for winter injury, especially over here in the Pacific Northwest. It's been a common thing if they get winter injury on POA annua greens, they will use Poa trivialis as part of their repair. Fair cold tolerance for greens, diploid perennial ryegrass. You can use this for quick repairs. It's not what I'm going to talk about, but I know people who do it. The problem is it's still not very cold tolerant, so it may die again the following year. but it is something for very quick repairs. And then Poa annua, annual bluegrass, actually 2-putt, which is our proprietary Poa annua you can buy. It has some improvement over standard annual bluegrass as far as cold tolerance, because the germplasm that developed it came from the University of Minnesota. So for fairways, what we look in rough, so superior cold tolerance against chewing fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, and hard fescue. Excellent creeping bent, colonial bent, slender creeping red fescue, strong creeping red fescue, and then tetraploid perennial ryegrass. Good tall fescue. Newer ones may be excellent as far as cold tolerance. We're seeing much less damage on them. They do get snow mold, but they outgrow it. And then diploid perennial ryegrass, and then Poa is again Poa annua, annual bluegrass. And then I just want to show you this picture that not all cultivars perform the same in trials. So this has been under ice sheets. This is Norway Research, Scandinavian Turfgrass Environmental Research Foundation. These trials are without fungicides in Norway, and they have seen variation in survival of creeping and colonial bent grass in other areas. And they do cooperative work with Canada. But this is what was interesting. These are all creeping bent grasses, yet the cultivar Pure Distinction died. This is an inland area in Norway, so it gets more of an, it's probably closer to what you actually have there in your area than a coastal area where some of the other Norwegian stuff is done. This is actually 2-putt. It survived. The Poa trivialis did not survive. And over here, colonial bent grasses, most of them survived, yes, except for the cultivar Charles. And Charles actually comes out of New Zealand. And so it did not have the cold tolerance necessary for this very cold site in Scandinavia, in Norway. So another reason why we talk about why we would prefer to seed in the spring, late spring, summer, early fall is germination of Poa annua and what optimal temperatures are. Germination of Poa annua, and this was a trial, this was a study done by John Kaminsky and Pete Dernoden, published in 2007 in Crop Science. And they found this is 4 different years in Pennsylvania. And pretty regularly, as soon as the soil temperature dropped to 20 degrees C, Poa annua started to germinate. And you can see it was pretty consistent over 4 years. Little germination occurs at high temperatures, yet those high temperatures over here are actually better for bent grass to come up. In their area, most of the germination actually occurred in the fall. September 15th was almost a magic date in Maryland. And the spring germination, which is what's down here, was much lower. Yeah, you'd get a few of them germinate in the spring, but not the level of them you get in the fall. And then the other thing is, if you look at creeping bent grass at these same temperatures, so Poa annua germinates down to 10 degrees, but you can see that it takes at that temperature, creeping bent is very slow to germinate. But if you're at higher temperatures, so this is 20 degrees C, where Poa is not yet quite just starting to germinate, that the creeping bent grass germinates very quickly. This is day 4, the blue line, and day 7, and it comes up much faster. That's why we like those higher soil temperatures, those summer seedings, or early fall. And this is at 10 degrees C, single seed lot, creeping bent grass, and this is at the 10 degrees C, and it takes them day 12 to get even to about 60% germination. And this was actually a study done by Devon Carroll when she was, this was her thesis work with John Kaminsky at Penn State, looking at seedling emergence and establishment of bent grass on a putting green after they did simulated winter kill in Pennsylvania. This was carried out again at 10 degrees C, cold temperatures. Poa annua is still germinating then. And you can see these are different cultivars, and these are actually the best ones. they had a total of 73 lots, and these were the best lots. They had to be very good germination at normal temperatures before they put them at this high temperature or this low temperature thing. And you can see to get to 50% germ, the average was about 14 days for the best ones to get to 50% germ at this temperature. And then this is what they did when they actually planted them out, and they went out and they found out they seeded in April. By they got to May, here's where they were. They didn't achieve until the beginning of June. Any of them had close to 70% cover, and it wasn't until you got till the end of June that they achieved on June 28th approximately full cover on these with a simulated winter kill. So it really is dead grass, and you determine that. Now what? You need to decide how much area is dead. Is it greens or fairways? What caused the turf death? And then select a species or multiple for repair. That speed of establishment is important, but long-term performance is critical. You don't want to repeat it. If you want creeping bentgrass as your desired species, we recommend you use chewings and or slender creeping red fescue as a nurse grass on both greens and fairways, about 2 pounds of bent to 6 pounds of chewings fescue. If the Kentucky bluegrass is your desired species, especially if you're on fairways, you can use again chewings or red fescues or tetraploid perennial ryegrass as a nurse grass. And you can use diploid, but tetraploid has a little better low temperature germination, and it has better cold tolerance than the diploids do. And it plays better with Kentucky bluegrass. So we actually prefer the tetraploid or the chewings or red fescue. The aim is to get back and play ASAP. And this just shows you right here, chewings fescue, this is 50% germ at 10 degrees C is about 7 days, where the bents are about 14 days. So you're able to get something up quicker. They're larger than bentgrass seedlings. They tolerate mowing and will fill the stand sooner. The chewings fescue can be managed out of the stand by lower mowing heights and higher in without affecting play. Some people have used perennial ryegrass to return to play soonest, but again, it is then prone to winter kill again, possibly the next year, not as quite as bad. So this is some data. Again, this is from STIR from Scandinavia, Scan Green 2015, 2018. This is across 4 sites in Scandinavia. Total winter damage of all the cultivars and certain species. And you can see here, chewings fescue is and creeping bent are much more winter hardy. And slender creeping red fescue, colonial bent, a little weaker. Annual bluegrass, 75% loss. Rough bluegrass, 44. Perennial ryegrass, 47. Not quite as bad as annual, but still not great. And then Kentucky bluegrass. This shows you actually the moss at the end of them, so how competitive they are against moss in addition to the winter damage. Microdocium patch, percent of plot area in spring after snow melt. And you can see that actually there's a lot of it here in the annual bluegrass, much less in most of the other species, and even during the growing season. And then of course they looked at take-all also, and the colonial bent grasses were a little worse for take-all than the other species of grass. So how much area is dead? Greens and fairways. Can you put out temporary greens? Players may not like it, but sometimes you need to. Do you need to remove that ice and snow? Can you improve that drainage? Can you cut down those big woody weeds out there called trees? In small areas, you can replace with hexagonal plugs from nursery or sod. If you have a nursery, if you don't have a big nursery, I suggest you put one in, because it's one of the best ways to either have your own sod or to get plugs to do repair. And sometimes you can purchase bentgrass sod to help with repairs. Prep the area. I say do both good and bad areas so you can increase your uniformity. Mow down to desired height or below. Aerate, vertical mow to remove as much thatch as possible. Remove organic matter, aggressive vertical mowing, and top dress as you put it in. You could also use a cedar with tightly set blades such as Rito, Turco Driveway. You can use spiker cedars. If you have a wider blade setting, you need to do more passes so you get them closer together. Graded shallow holes, dimple tines have worked very well. Make sure whatever you're using, you're going at a fairly shallow depth, if you're, especially for bent grass and even for the chewing fescue and Kentucky bluegrass. Use a minimum of 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet, and that should say 10 grams, not grams. 1 kg per 100 square meter, multiple directions. You actually get best success with a minimum of 3 to 4 pounds of total bent. And I still like people, even if you're using these, to broadcast a little bit and drag it into the canopy so you get some of it to come up in between those lines or those holes. Nurse crop a fine fescue, 6 to 10 pounds per 1,000. Add a starter fertilizer, soluble nitrogen, and continue with small quantities. And sometimes just that spoon feeding of soluble nitrogen really helps those things get established. Top dress. If you can find some dark sand or some dark organic matter, it can actually help these things heat up a little bit and give you an advantage. Roll and keep moist. So these are just some of the ones we've had good success with. This shows you some repairs in Norway where they did slit and spike seeding. So they did both slit and spike seeding on these of, this was the Verito and this was the Cissus spike cedar of, and they did creeping bent grass. Conomowoc Golf Club in Wisconsin, they did interseeded and they use these dimple tines, and you can see them in here, and they repaired very well. Use of covers. Covers can be very useful in preventing winter kill damage. Best in areas with consistent snow cover before desiccating winds. A lot of work on trying to make sure you have oxygen under them if they're down for long periods of time. You can, impermeable covers with ditches help prevent water, ice on greens. So if you've got an area where water tended to flow and make ice under it, we get people who will dig those channels and actually use impermeable covers then. In repairs, if you look at it, permeable plastic, in particular the evergreen or green jacket, have shown time after time to be very useful in repairs and getting back in place sooner and getting established. If you can't buy those, impermeable plastic with holes punched can work, but it takes you a while to punch the holes. I think if you can get these jackets, it really helps. It's necessary. I find these tend to be necessary to repair areas where only part of the green is damaged. All of these increase soil temperature, so speed up and increase germination. You need to pull them up after germination. If you get cold temperatures that return, you may need to reapply. So this is actually some study. This is data from Nebraska in 2014 and quality of seedling germination. And you can see the green jacket here got much better germination, much quicker than using a pigment, using just regular plastic. This is the control where they didn't do anything. So you, at a certain point, yes, they come together, but you can get back and play. You can be mowing here, where here you're waiting and waiting and waiting to get it to come in. So bent grass nursery to help with repairs. If you don't have one, put one out. Here's where some of those hexagonal plugs, which fit in well together and can be used to repair small areas. So if you want to choose cultivars and species for repairs or to just replace whatever you've got currently, try to use northern data for survival and diseases, performance on golf courses in similar climate zones. Trials on your own golf course are probably the best thing you can do. So when you put out that nursery, maybe put out a couple cultivars, look at them yourself, and you have a nursery and you actually have a site to look at these things. INTEP, Canada sites, Quebec has had some. Fine Fescue 2020 they have. 2008 Fairway Bent, they have the Greens trial, had the Greens trial in 2008. Guelph has had 2011 Bluegrass, currently no bent trials, but they have large blocks of some cultivars. 2018, they put the tall fescue INTEP in. I find again, this Scandinavian research, they have both northern or continental and southern, more coastal areas in Scandinavia, Michigan, Minnesota, Glenville, Illinois, which is a golf course, New York, Massachusetts on regular in-tap fairways, Kentucky bluegrass. Make sure you look at height of cut. So this is actually from Scan Green. This is 5 northern green sites, including University of Minnesota, University of Massachusetts, Iceland, and 2 in Norway. And you can see some of the overall mean, some of them like 777. This one's actually the cultivar McDonald here. And you can see the mean performance. These are 2 years of data. Here's separation, spring performance, summer performance, fall, coverage 3 weeks after sowing. So you can see some of these came up much quicker than some of these down here and established faster. Tiller density. And so they do a lot of work. And if you'd like some of this data or know where to find it, you can email me and I can show you where you can find some of this northern data. And like this is the 2014 INTEP 2018 data in Michigan. McDonald was the highest, not significantly different all the way down to 777 and these ones right here. And that's what I say, look for northern data when you do this. So also Scan Green or Scan Turf, STURF, they looked at creeping versus velvet versus colonial with fescue manages a bent or fine fescue for greens. And they were trying to see these species combinations, maybe for permanent, what they would do for us. And so here is red fescue with creeping bent. Here's some border plots. These are bent grass management, 3 millimeter height of cut, little more nitrogen per year. And this is what they called fescue maintenance, a little higher height of cut and less nitrogen. And they looked at these for a period of time. And what they came to the conclusion was there really wasn't a difference, either maintained as fescue or maintained as bent grass in these different combinations. The density, the velvet was a little higher, but we are having a hard time getting any velvet bent grass produced. In fact, I don't know if we've got any right now. But microdochium, you can see actually the creeping bent with the fescue had less than the colonial bent did, so it was actually better. The take-all seemed to be fine. And this just shows you, and they wondered about the botanical combination and what was going on. So using creeping bent grass in combinations with red fescues, because for years in a lot of Europe, they've only used colonial bent grass. They found with the creeping, they had better recuperative capacity and competition against Poa annua and moss when they had in creeping bent with the red fescues. And this was a 50-50 blend of chewings and slender creeping red, I should tell you that. They had less microdochium patch and take-all in the combination, less height growth and a better ball roll. And that's kind of what you guys are looking for, is you want your customers to be happy. And if you look, even after a couple, this is 28 months after seeding, didn't matter whether it was bent maintenance or fescue maintenance at Landvik, they still had a lot of fescue in it. In fact, here they had 69% fescue. Here they had about 40% fescue. Over here, this is a much further north one. They had a little less fescue remaining in it, but in bentgrass management, it tended to do a little better. So fairway repair. So when we look at Kentucky bluegrass as part of Stan's goal, again, you remember this graph I showed you. Under cold conditions, the difference between bluegrass, red fescue, or ryegrass is much greater. Use no more than 20% ryegrass in blend. If you use a tetraploid ryegrass, you can use 30%. Can also use chewings and creeping red fescues as part of blend. The fine fescues may be beneficial if part of problem is shade areas on fairways in particular. In combinations of fine fescue and bluegrass are better for cart traffic than say fine fescues by themselves. So if you want to choose a superior Kentucky bluegrass, you want one with excellent seedling vigor and rapid tillering, excellent wear tolerance or shear strength, high performance overall or in your area, excellent disease resistance, You have to or can compare across multiple in-taps. Bluegrasses are really hard to get into production. I'll tell you that right off. Shade tolerance, fall and spring growth, so you get better competition against Poa annua. So what types do I suggest for fairways? The compact types, which include compact, midnight, and America types. These are good for summer performance and wear tolerant, but they do not have good spring and fall growth. So if you use a midnight type, you need something else with it. The high density or aggressive types, there's limousine related ones, wear tolerant dense, they tend to be a little lighter green. P105 related or wear tolerant high density. Mid-Atlantic types, aggressive growth, some are stress tolerant and wear tolerant. These BVMG types, they have large seed. Some of them aren't as good for wear tolerance, but they will establish well. And the Shamrock types have large seed, high sod strength, extensive rhizomes, and establish into existing turf. Sidsport related is an older sports field type. Julia type have high wear tolerance and high density. And these, what they call Eurasian, are variable, and you have to look at them one by one. One of the things I want to tell you is the cheapest bluegrass you can find is what we would call common types. And they may call them Eurasian, or they may Midwest or common. And this is part of our DLF Pickseed chart, but these are all that type, and they're not really recommended for fairways. They require more water. They could go summer dormant, lower turf quality. You find them often in less expensive blends, and they are not good for sports fields or fairways. So don't put these cultivars, if you can avoid it, in your blends for sports fields or fairways. So establishing bluegrass into existing stand. This is actually harder than bentgrass, believe it or not. Multiple years of research trying to get bluegrass into perennial ryegrass. If they sprayed glyphosate on it, they could get 84% bluegrass in 6 months. Without glyphosate, this is what you have to do. You have to open up the canopy again. Notice it sounds very familiar. Aerification holes, superior or phrase mowing. They have to use 4 pounds of bluegrass or a mixture in fall, or 2 pounds in fall and 2 pounds in the spring. Mow turf at 1/4 inch for 4 weeks after sowing. You would get a 40% bluegrass. Again, reducing that competition from perennial rye or whatever else you've got there. Without low mowing, you need more. You need 4 pounds in spring and 4 pounds in fall. You need a bluegrass with good seedling vigor and establishment. So if you can use Roundup, use Roundup. If you apply Roundup and you seed on the same day, you have only a 7 to 21 day head start for the weeds. The new bluegrass turf seed germinates and establishes while the old turf and weeds are dying. Turf is more competitive, establishes at the same time as weeds. It's best with higher rates of N to grow and stand. Use higher rates of seed, and if using a seeder, in 2 directions. Dormant seed, if you think Poa annua has died, okay? So if you think it's going to die or has died, put down some seed of bluegrass as soon as you can. Thin fields or golf course fairways to reestablish bluegrass, little competition from ryegrass, core drag and broadcast bluegrass at high rates of seed. When soils warm up in the spring, the bluegrass will germinate and outcompete. It's more successful the longer you wait in spring for play to resume, but if you got to make money, you got to be out playing. Part of the solution and part of being competitive against Poa annua is to use 4 turf tetraploid perennial ryegrasses. They have double the chromosome number and DNA of regular ones. They're not quite as dense as diploids, so they blend better with many other species. Larger seeds, so faster germination. They germinate under colder soil temperatures. Their crown is set deeper, so they're wear tolerant and fast wear recovery, and it also helps with cold tolerance. And they're more drought tolerant than standard diploid ryegrasses. They kind of exist between tall fescues and regular diploid ryegrasses. But this is actually double. It's sold in the US as Replicator. This is the European name. This was at actually Greensheit in Norway. And the double here survived. And all this here is Poa annua here. It survived, and the rest of this is Poa annua. where the diploid perennial ryegrasses died, and this is in Norway. And it blends better with Kentucky bluegrass. This is some other data from ScanTurf showing double how much it's better for especially the winter color and the winter hardiness than a lot of these other species. And Fabian is another tetraploid, and here's another down here. So they also have higher resistance to gray snow mold and microdochium patch than diploid perennial ryegrasses. So that's another reason why they tend to survive C6-2 over some of the diploid ones. And they have deeper crowns for better survival. So plan a course of action. Repair quickly with help of covers, nurse grasses, and priming. Repair with more cold tolerant and desiccation tolerant species such as creeping bentgrass, Kentucky bluegrass, chewings, red fescues, and tetraploid perennial rye with bluegrass. Plan further interseedings in summer or early fall or dormant seed to get a greater conversion to your desired species. Correct any problem areas you have, collar dams, poor drainage, shade. Plant growth regulators can help, and they can retard it, but you just have to be careful when you come back with a dose after your seedlings have just come up on some of the growth regulators. Moving away from poa annua, you have less microdochium, less anthracnose, less dollar spot, better heat and cold tolerance, easier summers and winters, and happier golfers. And so you can call or email me with questions at any point. I'm also on Twitter. At this point, I respond to direct messages, DMs on Twitter. You can text me here any way you want to do it. And if we've got any questions, I'll take them now, Andrew.
All right, one question I have here in the chat is asking if there's any varieties of bent that are better shade tolerant.
Well, what's interesting is a few years ago, they haven't done that much look at it lately, but a few years ago, velvet bentgrass is very shade tolerant. But again, I told you we don't have very much of it. But they did a comparison with velvet bentgrass, and they compared it to Thai creeping bentgrass. And Thai was just as shade tolerant as the velvet was, and this was in Wisconsin. We've also had reports that McKenzie, which is actually related to Thai, in areas around St. Louis tends to be more shade tolerant. We're actually thinking most of our newest ones, our newest cultivars or bent grasses, have much greater shade tolerance than the old ones did. And part of the reason is they have more tiller density. And when I actually start looking at it, I think that tiller density, as we moved it forward, we're getting more shade tolerant in our creeping bent grass. And we're seeing more and more reports of less problems in shade with our newest creeping bents. In some areas of the country, it's not as much the shade as the lack of airflow. And so they still need fans, but we've had them in some pretty good shade situations. And we have had a lot of these, like 007 has been used extensively on the coast of California, often with Thai or McKenzie blended in. But both of those, all of those have been used, and they have fog all the time. And they found that they're competing against poa annua in those fog situations. So I think our new ones, so moving to a new bent grass with higher density, I think will help you in the shade. Any other questions up there?
One term that I was unfamiliar with that you brought up was phrase mowing.
Okay, phrase mowing, and it's spelled very different ways depending upon who there's like 3 spellings of it. It started out actually in Europe, and what it is it comes in and you actually remove the top surface, all the grass plants in it. And they do this at Wimbledon. They come in, and they used to be like 100% poa annua at Wimbledon. And they came in and they remove it with this machine called a phrase mower, and it takes up all the crowns. It's like almost a shallow sod cutter. and they take the surface off and then they reseed it with perennial ryegrass. And they've come to the conclusion that they do this every year at places like Wimbledon, and they have 100% perennial ryegrass, which is much better surface for a grass tennis court. If you go in the southern United States, they've gone in, they do this, and they can actually clean up or remove areas where they've had a lot of poa annua and say Bermuda grass. And in some cases, they don't have to do anything because it comes back from the rhizomes if it's Bermuda grass. Or they do it on sports fields. They do this to clean up. Europe has been using a lot. They've made these machines a little smaller. And essentially you come in and you can cut off that top surface of all the poa in it. And you also not only get the top of it, you get all the weed seeds are in that top, and then you reseed into that surface. And so the biggest problem with the phrase mowing is you get quite a bit of green material that you have to either find a place to dispose of, or you have to work with, say, the local dump. Some guys I know who get it, they've taken it and they found a place on their property and they've actually just composted that, and then they've used the compost someplace. But phrase mowing is spelled, it's spelled F-R-A-Z-E, F-R-A-I-S-E. Look at some of the machines, but they've made some smaller machines that really, and we've known some people who've cleaned up tees and made them much better because they're flatter. Even with their smaller machines, if you've got a lot of undulations on your greens, it's a little harder to get in and actually take everything off. But there's been a lot of work on them. They're doing more work, and it's one way to almost renovate a surface without having to do a major renovation. I suggest you look at it. It's kind of interesting. Any other questions?
Thank you. I think one's coming in here. I'll just take a look. Okay, so all the new varieties of drought-tolerant bluegrasses and perennial rye. What is the main difference between what DLF sells?
Well, we have a lot of good drought-tolerant Kentucky bluegrasses and perennial ryegrasses. One of the things we've been working on, we do that as part of our screening thing. We look at drought tolerance. We also have been looking at, we're part of what's called the A-list, which is a group of companies, which is Alliance for Low Input Sustainable Turf. And these are cultivars that not only have to show drought tolerance, they have to show good turf quality and a standard NTAP. They also have to show in our A-list trials where we're not allowing them to use, they're on low nitrogen, no fungicides or chemistry is allowed. And then we look at the drought tolerance under these low maintenance conditions. And they have to have performance in multiple locations under those low input characteristics. And part of that is we're committed to sustainability in the long term, because grasses are great for carbon sequestration. And even when you take out the hidden carbon costs, we still have benefits for carbon sequestration and sustainability, but we want those numbers down more so we have even greater environmental benefit from our grasses. I tried to avoid an advertisement, but I figured I'd give it if you want it. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing anything else come through the chat. We'll just give it a minute here and see if anyone else wants to type something up.
And if anybody wants to unmute and just ask something direct, that's fine too. And if anybody, like I said, if you want to contact me directly, I answer questions. I talk to people. And always enjoy talking to greenskeepers or superintendents.
Right, well, I think that's it. On behalf of Even Spray, I'd like to thank you again, Dr. Brilman, for taking your time to speak with us today. Hopefully, we're not going to have to deal with too much dead grass this winter or this spring here when the snow is finally gone, but you never know.
Well, it's still an time coming into the spring, summer to go ahead and put some grass seed down just in case, because you don't know what next year is going to come. And spring or summer are the best times to get a head start on next year.
Absolutely. I think if I took away anything today, is that in my superintendent days, I should have been throwing down a whole lot more seed.
It really does help in the long term.
Yep.
Makes your life easier.
Okay, well, again, everyone, the test will be sent out shortly by email, and you can fill that out and scan it and send it back, or send your answers in and we'll take care of it. Thank you very much, Dr. Brilman. You have yourself a great day.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.